Hi guys, Olive here. Today I'm here to bring you my November 2016 wrap-up and my December 2016 TBR. You probably already know by now that November was Nonfiction November, an event that I co-hosted with Gemma from Nonfic Books. This was a casual month-long challenge in which we tried to encourage the booktube community and the larger bookish internet to read more nonfiction during the month of November. I had a very ambitious TBR for November of 8 books, and while I only managed to read 5 of those, all of them did manage to fit into the 4 different categories that we created for the event. I read 2 books for the controversial category, and those were I Don't, A Contrarian History of Marriage by Susan Squire, and You Don't Have to Like Me by Alita Nugent. I talked about these 2 books in their own video, and I will post the link to that video in the description box below in case you missed it. I also read 3 other books for Nonfiction November that were off of my TBR that I have not yet discussed. The first of those is Buffering, Unshared Tales from a Life Fully Loaded by Hannah Hart. You may have heard of Hannah Hart before. She is a YouTube personality with her own channel called My Hearto. She is most well known for her hilarious cooking series, My Drunk Kitchen. I have been a fan of Hannah Hart and her My Drunk Kitchen series for a very, very long time. I think I started watching in 2011. I started watching her videos shortly before my study abroad trip to Russia, and I have very vivid memories of trying to watch the latest My Drunk Kitchen episode with the really, really crappy internet in St. Petersburg. Buffering indeed. I have kept up with her channel over the years. I donated to her Indiegogo campaign where she was launching this meetup tour across the United States, and each meetup was a volunteer event at a food shelter. My husband and I got to go to the one that was hosted in our city. We got to meet her. She is just as delightful as she seems on the internet. So of course, when I heard that she had this memoir coming out, I was desperate to get it, and I ended up picking it up on audio since she does read it herself. I expected this book to be more lighthearted and funny than it ended up being, but it actually was all the better for it. In her memoir, she discusses her upbringing, her childhood with a schizophrenic mother and a Jehovah's Witness priest father. She talks a lot about her experience coming to terms with her sexuality. Hannah Hart is openly lesbian. And she also talks about how she accidentally stumbled into being a YouTuber. In our medium of YouTube, it is kind of weird, but you do start to feel, especially when you follow a person for a really long time, that you get to know them. And so in the least creepy way possible, I am so proud of her for publishing this memoir. She talked about things in her past with such honesty, and it was really coming from a place of healing and acceptance of everything that she has been through. It was heartbreaking at times, but very uplifting at other times. It was, as you can expect, funny, but incredibly sincere. And she proved to me in this memoir that she is definitely someone worth admiring. That was the book that I ended up reading for the challenge of new. For the challenge fascinating, I ended up reading The Keys of Egypt, The Obsession to Decipher Egyptian Hieroglyphs by Leslie and Roy Atkins. This is the story of how the Egyptian hieroglyphs were first deciphered by a young Frenchman named Jean-Francois Champollion. In a lot of ways, this book could be considered his biography. The book goes into depth about his home life growing up, about his family, specifically his older brother who was very close with him and was in many ways his benefactor and mentor. It talks about his time spent at school. It talks about his absolute fascination with language. He had a lot of health problems, and so he kind of dipped in and out of his studies of hieroglyphs. He always had an extreme interest in Egypt, but his determination to decipher the hieroglyphs was encouraged when he started to get some competition. There were some other scholars who were pretty determined as well to get their name into the history books by being the first person to decipher hieroglyphs. One of them was an Englishman named Thomas Young, who remained adamant that he was the first one to decipher hieroglyphs even after his system proved false. Thomas Young does not come across in the best light in this book, and that is not the fault of the authors, it's his own fault for being horrible. This book does talk about how Champollion went about deciphering the hieroglyphs. Champollion spent a lot of time studying the cursive form of hieroglyphics, and he also spent a lot of time studying the languages that developed from the hieroglyphs over the years. This and his extensive cultural knowledge of the Egyptians through his own studies helped him achieve his goal of actually deciphering the hieroglyphs. I did find it fascinating, so it achieved that goal. I was hoping that it would focus a little bit more on the hieroglyphs themselves. It was focused very heavily on Champollion. It was focused a lot on Thomas Young. It was focused a lot on what was happening in French politics at the time. And while I totally get why that was necessary to paint the world in which Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphs, it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. But no worries, in my last haul, I picked up a book about how to teach yourself the hieroglyphs, so that itch will be scratched. And the last book I picked up for Nonfiction November was The End of Alchemy, Money, Banking, and the Future of the Global Economy by Mervyn King. This was a book written by a former governor of the Bank of England about our financial system, its roots and development, its successes and failures, its main focus being the most recent financial crisis of 2007-2008. I would say that this book is heavily centered on the idea that Mervyn King calls radical uncertainty, which basically means our total and complete inability to predict anything relating to financial markets. It talks a lot about how imbalanced the system was before our most recent crisis, and talks about how imbalanced it remains, which makes another crisis very likely. I did find it particularly interesting when he was talking about necessary adjustments to make our financial system more stable, such as rising of interest rates, which have remained historically low since the crisis, and how an adjustment like that is good for the long term, but is not necessarily good for the short term, which explains why it is a policy that is not enacted. Since unfortunately economic policy and political policy are inextricably linked, it makes sense that politicians want to do what's best in the short term to show voters that they're doing the job they promised, when really that is not what is best for the health of our financial system in the long run. It talks about how Keynesian policy, or public spending through mainly infrastructure projects, is good in the short term, but it can sometimes be used as a crutch. It was a very enlightening book, and there were some good takeaways from it, but I found it a bit lacking in policy prescription. Can you tell that I was a public policy graduate student for like 5 minutes? It was a bit jarring hearing over and over again, basically, we don't know how to predict anything, but we're doing things wrong. What's the point in writing a whole book on this subject if the only thing we see when we look into the future is darkness? It was intriguing enough to give it around 3.5 stars, but it was not as groundbreaking as I thought it would be. So those were the 5 books I read for Nonfiction November. Now getting into what I would like to read during December. There are 4 books that I have been trying to get through for about an eternity, and I would like to finish those up by the end of the year. If I cannot finish them, I am removing them from my currently reading shelf and trying them again some other time. I need a fresh start on my currently reading shelf. But I am really going to make these 4 books a priority. Those books are Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin, A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, which feels like I've been reading it for half of my adult life, The Empress of Art by Susan Jacks, and Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. I'm also planning on doing a few buddy reads in the month of December. The first will be Night Film, also by Marisha Pessl. I'll be reading her entire bibliography in the month of December. I'm going to be reading this with Claire from The Book Fox, who is a lover of horror, so she will probably find this very tame and I probably will wet my pants. I'm going to be reading Radiance by Catherine M. Valente with Sabrina from Unmanaged Mischief. And then a group of booktubers was planning to read Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, but I'm not sure if it's still on. I'm also currently reading an ebook that just became available through my library called Unmentionable. I have a feeling this one is going to be a very quick read, and it is absolutely hilarious so far. I'm also hoping to read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, Affinity by Sarah Waters, and the last book I'm hoping to get to is a book I got off of NetGalley called The Bear and the Nightingale. This is by Catherine Arden. Frankie from Frankie Reads let me know that it was available on NetGalley and said it was something that I might enjoy since I think it is set in Russia and is compared to the Night Circus, so basically all of my wheelhouses are represented. So I'm really excited to give that one a try and see what I think of it. So there you have it. Those are all the books I read during Nonfiction November 2016. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. And I was very excited to tell you all about the books that I am hoping to read in December. I definitely want to hear from you if you have read any of these books, heard of any of these books, or want to read any of these books now that you've heard about them here in this video. You can, of course, put those comments down in the comments section below. And if you'd like to reach me anywhere else on social media, I have a variety of profiles, and those are all listed in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.